and thank you for tuning in to Starting Small. Today, I'm joined by Nick Metcalf of Stake Stones. Nick, thank you so much for joining me today.
My pleasure. Good to be here, Cameron.
Yeah, so I'd like to start out with your upbringing. Where did you grow up, and what would you say your childhood was like?
So I grew up in a pretty small English village. The upbringing was fairly standard, I guess. Went to maybe a toughish middle school, which my parents credit my determination for things to be due to. So yeah, I think it
Yeah,
was a pretty standard childhood. Yeah, some tough runs, but generally, but pretty happy kid, I guess.
certainly. What were some of your aspirations growing up as a kid? Were you involved with sports or lemonade
Sports
stand?
was everything for me. Yeah, that was pretty much what I did as a kid. So, I was
Yeah,
playing football and I took up golf pretty late. I think that certainly had a big part in who I am, in terms of always, striving to get better at something. That's a big part of my character, I guess, and still battling the golf course and trying to get better at that as well.
mm, certainly. Going on to school, what was your grade school like? Did you get involved with sports through high school and then college? What were some of your aspirations once you got into the grade school years?
Yeah, I suppose I didn't really have aspirations beyond school. My family weren't from, university backgrounds and things, so it was, yeah, I was, I guess, a fairly typical kid. I was at school just because I was told to be there and supposed to be there. I didn't particularly enjoy it. I think if I was back there these days, I'd be diagnosed with something like ADHD or perhaps even some mild dyslexia. But yeah, I got through school. It wasn't great. I suppose sport was something that kept me going there. As I
Mm,
mentioned before, playing football, that was a big part of what I did. Yeah, but education was kind of always a secondary thing for me. I
yeah,
didn't really understand the point of it. So
yeah. So you mentioned university. Did you end up going to college then? And if so, what did you study there?
I did, yeah. I didn't know what I was going to do post school. My interest was in sports,
Mhm.
so I was looking at universities very late. Ended up going on to study sports science, which I did enjoy. It was a fun degree. Went to a decent university in the end, and spent 3 years studying that. And I suppose that was probably the start of my entrepreneurial journey as well.
Mm,
Not necessarily through sport, but other opportunities that came to while I was at university.
yep, certainly. And then post graduation, what did you end up doing for, say, work? Pre-stake stones.
Yeah, so I remember having a heart-to-heart actually with a friend's mum, and there was a sales job that I was looking at, which was reasonably well paid. Well, there was an internship with IMG, who are one of the biggest sports marketing agencies out there. That was
Mm,
going to be unpaid for at least 6 months, and I was, to and fro between the two, and ultimately, the great advice I had was, what are you interested in? What's your passion? And that was sport and the sports marketing side of things. And again, at that stage, I was, pretty into the world of golf. So I knew IMG had a massive interest in that sport. So I went for the unpaid internship,
mm,
and yeah, did that for in the end 9 months. So that was the start of my career.
wow. And then after that, how did you get into culinary then? Especially like steak stones going in from kind of that sports marketing background. What leads you this way?
Yeah, well, it's definitely related. I went from working for IMG to actually getting a role with the European Tour, working on an
Mm,
agency side, running a sponsorship. And one of the events we were on was in Versailles, in France. We were at a big media lunch, and we had fillet steak for lunch. And I remember they ask you how you want your steak done, and I don't know whether you've travelled much or been to France, but they consider anything beyond blue is overcooked. So at the time, I liked my steak well done, and knowing that they were going to bring it out almost still mooing, I said I'd have mine well done, and it came out. It wasn't quite well cooked enough. I asked for it
mm.
to go back to the kitchen, and the chef came out with his tall hat and said, "Whose is this?" And I kind of sheepishly put my hand up and said, "It's mine." And he was like, "Why kill it twice?" So I said, "Well, I just want it killed once, and actually it's my steak, so perhaps I can have it cooked how I want." So yeah, I guess that joined together with a visit to Brazil and Argentina to the churrascarias where you get your freshly cooked food.
Mm,
And I started putting two and two together and just sort of wanted to find a way to allow you to enjoy your steak cooked as you wanted. So that was definitely the seeds of the idea. Although it took a few years to
Mm,
get to that point of getting things going.
wow, incredible. If you can explain to the listeners, what is a steak stone and how does that kind of process work, especially for the consumer making their steak themselves?
Yeah, so it's part of the story as to where we got with the product that I kind of knew the concept could work. I knew there was a way to retain heat in stones, but I didn't really know how to do it when we started out. So I was
Mhm,
looking at lots of different options for the stone, and I actually went on the UK program Dragon's Den, which you guys have Shark Tank, so
mhm.
the equivalent of that. And one of the prerequisites to go on the show was to have all your suppliers lined up and have a letter from them all saying that you were using them and they had the stock ready and the prices agreed. And
Mhm.
I went to the stone supplier I had at the time, and I knew it wasn't quite the right stone that I was using.
Yeah.
And the guy wouldn't give me the letter for
Mm,
various reasons. We'll call it fate. He just said, "Yeah, I don't think I can supply as much as you need at the price you want." So I was stuck literally about 5 days before I was due to go on national TV
mm,
without having the main feature point of the product. So I
yeah.
went away and literally spent an entire night online trying to find someone. I knew I needed lava stone because I knew lava, could hold the heat better than any other stone. And I eventually found a supplier at about 4 in the morning in Italy and agreed with him the next day. He was going to get some samples off to me. We literally had a bank holiday in the UK on the Monday. So he got these products to me amazingly on the Tuesday. I tested the stone once before I went to the filming of Dragon's Den. Unfortunately, it
Mm.
worked, and we walked up the stairs of Dragon's Den with our steak sizzling on the stone, still with our fingers crossed slightly that this thing wasn't going to blow up or do anything crazy on TV. But
Uh,
fortunately, it went okay.
wow, that's incredible. So what was that experience like going on Dragon's Den, especially at an early stage like this as well?
Yeah, it was pretty terrifying. I mean, in the run up to the show was great. Actually, it was something that I'm not a massive fan of the format of the program anymore. I think it is probably there to make fun and exploit entrepreneurs and startups a little bit.
Yeah.
But for me, it was definitely a case that we had to write the right business plan. We had to have all our eggs in a row. We didn't want to look silly on national TV. So I knew my
Mm,
numbers, I knew the business, I knew the marketing. Again, the way that they go about things is a little bit untoward. I mean, they had one question to me, which was posed to me by I believe Deborah Meaden, and she said, "What market research have you done?" And I went into a long answer that I'd seen this kind of style of cooking out in Asia. And I'd actually been to a restaurant and I'd interviewed 50 people who'd come out of a restaurant and said, "Look, if you could have this at home, would you be interested?" And everyone had said yes. And she
mm,
said, "Okay, that's good." And then Duncan Bannatyne said, "Well, who's actually eaten off your product?" I said, "Well, literally my family, because I've only just, kind of created it." And then it went back to him saying, "Well, that's not really market research, is it?" Now, when that was cut onto TV, it went to Deborah Meaden saying, "What market research have you done?" It came back to me saying, "Well, my family have eaten on it." And Duncan Bannatyne said, "Well, that's not market research." And I'm like, "Well,
mm,
so when that comes out on TV and they make you look a bit silly when you've, actually given a very long answer that has solved the
yeah.
problem, then it's, yeah, that's the problem with those shows, I guess. But they're for entertainment. But at the end of the day, it was a great founding for us. We set the business up well,
Mm,
knowing that we were going on there, and obviously
mm,
you get some great exposure from it.
certainly.
Unfortunately, due to a delay with one of our suppliers, we weren't quite ready to sell on the back of the show, so I think we missed a trick with that. But again, that's
Mm,
a learning as
mm,
well, that you can't always rely on all of your suppliers all the time.
certainly. So, similar to Shark Tank, I've had a few guests on here from Shark Tank, and they say you don't know if your episode's going to air or especially when it's going to air. Is that the same for Dragon's Den? And then when did your episode air in comparison to when you were on?
Yeah, it is. It took probably 8 months from filming to going on. And yeah,
Mhm.
another slightly funny story was that I knew I was going to be on episode 2 of series 2. So this is way back in 2006.
Uh-huh.
And I was actually working in a sports development role at the time. And my boss, who was a good guy, knew I was up to something. His boss didn't know I was up to anything. And literally, I was kind of, preparing how I was going to tell him that I was about to, be on national TV, launching my own business. But I was preparing that for after episode 1 had gone out. So
Mm,
literally, I'm watching episode 1, kind of planning how I'm going to break this to my boss. And they show a clip of me walking up the stairs. at the end of episode 1 when I haven't told anyone I'm going to be on this TV show. And literally
Oh
my
man.
phone rings instantly, and my boss is like, Nick, not sure this is going to go down too well with the top dogs. And I was like, yeah, sorry, didn't realize it was going to be out. But that was a big thing. I started this business while I was doing another job. But
Mhm.
again, that's the hustle we've all got to do when we're starting something. Is I had a lot of flexibility with that role, so I was able to do what I needed to do to get my business going at the same time as well.
Mhm. Certainly. And then once that aired, what is the traffic like? Was that a massive spike for the business? And then also, how did you retain and keep up with that production?
Yeah, as I mentioned, unfortunately, we were let down a little bit with one of our suppliers, so we didn't actually have the product ready to go when
Yeah.
the show aired. But we did get a lot of inquiries. It would clearly have been better to have the site live and been able to take those orders directly.
Mhm.
So that was a good start to the business in terms of getting the exposure. I'd actually planned pretty soon after the show to go to a UK trade fair, which is called Ideal Home Show, which is sold to you as a exhibitor, as a big show with lots of great ABC One audience coming to see it. As it turned out, it was more like busloads of retirees from the coast who were coming up for a day out to look at things. And it was a 24-day show, so this was brutal. I mean, this wasn't a 2-3 day show.
Oh wow.
And they ended and started the show with songs every day. And the closing thing was Amy Winehouse. They tried to make me go to rehab, and after about a week of this show, I'm like, clearly there wasn't much hair to tear out, but I'm there kind of going, what are we doing here? We were selling 1 or 2 sets a day. And then Thursday nights came around, which was when they had late night opening, and people would
Mhm.
have a few drinks and the wine tasting. And then we were selling like 20, 30 sets. I was like, okay, there is something here. But I'd already realized during, the run up to this show that, I wasn't making enough from the business in the early days to keep it going. So as well as having a 28-day show, I was actually running in and out of London, doing some interviews, again, for another sports marketing company, to kind of, pay the bills. Had young kids at the time, and, we were really doing the kind of startup hustle, trying to
Yeah.
get that going. So I think it was pretty much the last day of the show I got confirmed that I got this other job. The show hadn't gone quite as well as I wanted. So yeah, juggling those balls,
Mm.
and then started working again back in town. Getting on the train, going in early in the morning, coming back, pretty much having dinner, and then going to a cabin we built at the end of the garden to try and get the orders going with the business. So
Mm.
yeah, it was a tough start.
Yeah, certainly. So what was your main forms of marketing going through? Of course, you launched kind of with Dragon's Den, and then also from there you went to shows. What performed well for you marketing wise?
Yeah, I think in the early days for us, the show was there. We thought we had a consumer product, and that was one of the things we said on Dragon's Den. Richard Farley was there, who was as a tech guy, and he was like, "Well, I don't get what's different to your product to what's out there already." There were similar concepts with stones, but they had ovens that heated up to like 550 centigrade to
Mm.
heat these stones. So they told you there was no way you could have it at home, and the stone that we had sourced, you could basically heat directly on a naked flame.
Mm.
So we were going towards the consumer market with the product, and therefore doing the shows. It was probably really back in those days, very early on in the world of Google Ads and social media and things. We made sure that we had our brand on there, and I guess that's one of the things now that we still are very grateful for, that we have Slash Steak Stones on every major social media brand there is.
Yep.
And now, if you're trying to start a brand these days, I think that's one of the challenges. It's almost impossible to come up with a brand name that you can get either the Instagram, the TikTok, everything, clean for. So,
Yeah.
we did that. Probably the mistake of the business for me was that we didn't realize how good our marketing was just by having the product in restaurants.
Yeah.
And again, as we built the business, it became, I suppose, easier and easier to market, because the more restaurants we sold to, the more people were having the concept. So we sell to restaurants, all over the world now, big brands. And obviously, on a Friday, Saturday night, whatever it is, these customers are going in, having our product, seeing our branding on the unit, and hopefully going off and searching either for our brand or for the concept. And
Mhm.
that's what really, after probably 3 or 4 years, gave us the opportunity to jump into the business full time,
Mm.
and from that, take up other marketing channels to really drive the business forward.
Mm. For sure. So, to the listeners out there, can you explain? So, once they receive a steak stone shipment, how does that then work if they wanted to cook for dinner that night as a consumer just from home?
Yeah.
You put it into the oven. How does that process work?
Yeah, so the easiest way to heat the stone is on direct heat. For
Mhm.
UK listeners, it's between 3 to 350 centigrade. For
Okay.
US, it's more like 550 to 660 Fahrenheit. So most ovens don't go up to that heat. Some do, but you can get it up to that heat by putting it under the grill or the broiler. So you put the stone as close as you can to the heating element. You can put it directly onto a flame, and you give that maybe 20 to 30 minutes to heat up, and that
Mhm.
will then retain a sizzling heat for between 20 and 30 minutes. So you can cook your steak live at the table. So it's a very different experience to cooking your steak and taking it off and eating it. Now,
Yeah.
the best chef in the world, he's going to rest that steak and he's going to, give it to you, and it's going to be lukewarm at best. So
Mhm.
that was one of the big things with ours, that we wanted that hot steak. We loved that when you were in the Jurassic era and you had the hot mouthful of food. So the dry searing heat that our stone puts into the food will only really cook the outside 1 or 2 millimeters because it interacts with the moisture. So if you put a nice fillet steak on there, within 5 minutes, it's still only going to be cooked through a few millimeters on the outside. But when you cut the pieces a little bit smaller and turn them, they'll start to cook through. So you can
Mm.
choose if you want your steak well done by cutting it into strips and turning it over, or having it rare and just cutting it and searing it. So, even when we have dinner at home, we'll have the four of us as a family, we all eat it differently. My wife will bite off cut off a small nibble and just sear that because she likes it quite rare. I'll play around with mine a little bit and have different experiences. The sets we have a lot of different options. So we have
Mm.
our main, probably our best seller, the sizzling steak set, has 3 sauce pots as well, so you can add different flavors in there. Again, unfortunately for the boys, it's soy sauce and tomato ketchup, but you can put different flavors in there to tailor it to different cuisines. So again, that's part of the strength of the product. We have sharing plates that are much larger stones that you can put in the middle of the table. You can even use those to cook on the barbecue and then remove the meat off, or the fish off, and cut and cook each bite as you like with that. So
Mm.
you're able to tailor the cuisine by the sauces, the side dishes that you serve,
Yeah.
and we sell to many different restaurants, from Indian to Italian to classic,
Mm.
British steak and French steak. We sell all over the world and have different sets for the different steaks. Typically, our US audience like the slightly larger stones for their slightly larger steaks.
Mhm.
We tend to try and promote deeper rather than wider, if you get what I mean, with the steak, because that
For
really
sure.
allows you to enjoy every bite as you like.
For sure. Yeah, getting that consumer feedback, especially from restaurants, from the shows. What would you say is your main demographic then for steak stones? Of course, it's a universal product, especially for families. But can you depict that?
I guess it's easy to say foodies, but anyone who likes their food enjoys the experience of dining. I mean, like any business, you're going to get negative comments. The only thing we ever get is, why would I go to a restaurant and want to cook anything myself? And we have a
Hmm.
restaurateur over in Dublin who's actually opened 5 restaurants on the strength of our product, and he does a 10-minute challenge. He says, if anyone comes in and says to me, why do I want to come out and have to cook it myself? He said, well, look, I'll give you it, and 10 minutes in, if you want me to cook your brand new steak from scratch in the kitchen and do that, then I will. And he says he's never had anyone take him up on it, because 10 minutes in, once you're realizing that you can cut, cook, sear, and enjoy every bite of steak exactly as you want, then you realize that there's more to it than just eating the food, right? This is an
Mm.
experience. It's something that smells great, sounds great, looks great, and tastes fantastic. And
Yeah.
because it awakens all the senses, it's something that people always remember where they've had. So if we are doing a trade show, people always tell us, oh, I remember first having this in Madeira in Portugal. They can tell us the name of the restaurant. I mean, they remember it so well because the senses are all aroused. So I
Mhm.
think for us, that's the benefit and the strength of the product, is that when people go out to a restaurant and have it, they do remember the concept, and that
Certainly.
keeps them going back to those restaurants. So that's great for us selling to the restaurants. It also
Mhm.
perhaps has them, wanting to buy some of these to have for dinner parties at home. Whether that's just for a couple on one of our sharing plates, or for 6 or 8 people with their own individual set. It actually becomes a very sociable dinner party as well, because you're not slaving away for hours in the kitchen cooking
Yeah.
that main ingredient. You are just there, and serving the stone, serving the steak, and everyone does it their own way. So again, the chef never gets blamed for the steak being cooked wrong.
Love that. So I like to conclude each episode with this. If you could share one piece of advice with an aspiring entrepreneur, maybe something you've learned or regret along the way, what would you say that would be?
For me, it is just to start. There's
Hmm.
a great quote by Goethe, which begins, "Until one is committed, there is hesitancy," and it ends, "Whatever you do or dream, you can begin it." Business has a power, genius, and magic in it. So, for me, that's what it's all about. You meet so many people, and I'm glad I'm not in that camp, because I did just start. But so many people who say, "Oh, I wish I'd done this. I wish I'd done that." I think it's easier now to get going than ever before. You can create a website in 5 hours your own with no experience. You've got the likes of Wix and all the other platforms to do that.
Mhm.
You've got supplying platforms like Alibaba where you can source anything. You don't even have to come up with your own product anymore, right? You can just go on there and think what's selling well. I mean, the likes of Amazon will tell you things that are flying. So
Mhm.
I think people just have to get out there and get started if there's something they want to do, and if they don't want to work on the 9 to 5 grind that many people are still trapped in.
Yep. Certainly. Well, Nick, thank you so much for joining me today. And to the listeners out there, make sure to check out Stake Stones at stakestones.com.